Hi there, folks. So I've got a rather serious subject to talk about, and it's also a fairly personal one. And it's regarding my foster brother that I grew up with many years ago. I found out a couple of years ago that he had been convicted of a very serious charge, that he had pled guilty to it, in fact, in a London court here in the UK, for distribution and possession of child pornography. I didn't know that at the time it was of such a serious nature. Subsequently, later found out that it was actually category A pornography, and that's the most serious classification. Some of the most disturbing images, and for those who are easily, I think anyone would be disturbed, but a warning for those perhaps who may easily be upset. It's a very emotionally disturbing case. One of the images was an 8-year-old child being raped, for example. That was the worst one I saw described. Just horrific. And I just recently found out that was the kind of nature of the pornography that he had. He had been working up till then and after then, incredibly, as a pastor, a preacher in a church, through which he had access to youth groups and was actively working in and around various youth groups in the UK. Rather disturbingly, he then, after his conviction and time in prison, he then fled the UK against the judge's orders, and he went off to Bulgaria, awfully working around other vulnerable youths, some street children and people from a very poor background. And what he was doing really was having this front where he would fundraise online. He had all these websites and this charity donation page, and a lot of his ideas were about, ironically, trying to expose various systematic corruptions or abuses that he saw, So he was talking about things he alleged in the Vatican, in various governments, in people in different positions of authority. He then has subsequently used that and said, as part of his spin doctoring, his propaganda, that there are those in authority that have planted the pornography on his computer to set him up as a way to silence him, to keep him quiet. But it's just false, What you've got to ask yourself, of course, is if somebody was really a man of God or, was a minister of some sort, would they really plead guilty to horrific charges that were just incredibly indecent and disgusting? Would they smear their own name and reputation? He alleged that the reason he did that was in order to get a lesser sentence, and because if he went to trial, that it would become more publicised, and that he was therefore in fear of his life if other prisoners became more aware of the nature of the type of convictions that he was accused of. But it became public knowledge anyway, and he must have known that. It was publicised in various newspapers and online websites. And I just think that no person who's really a person of God would ever allow their own name and reputation to be smeared like that and lie about something, admit to something, such an appalling accusation of that nature. Because it would just cast whole doubt upon everything, and no one would really know what to believe or not. And those of us that do believe in the sacredness of the commandments, bear not false witness is one of those, for good reason. Because when we lie about really important things and we give false testimony, it corrupts other people and it distorts our perceptions and the perceptions of others, really. So we then don't know what to believe. he really has taken advantage of this position, and it's just incredible how he was able to fool so many people for so long. Just really shocking. When I first heard about the actual accusations and that a couple of years back now, it actually brought back some memories of my time with him within our foster home together. I grew up with his foster parents under the same roof, and there were several incidents that occurred during that time. At the time, I really didn't think as much of it. But now in hindsight, with what I know about him and the allegations against him, now I look back at what happened in a different light, really. And I didn't speak out at the time, I guess, because I was a bit ashamed and embarrassed, I suppose, really. I was only kind of about 13, 14, that age. He's 6 years my senior, so he would have been 19, 20, about that age. And really what happened between us, it was sort of like a game, and something that he started, he led, and it sort of involved, I can describe it as naked wrestling, I suppose, really. A bit weird. I thought it was weird at the time, but I just kind of saw it as mucking about, and it's just kind of like just guys having a bit of a laugh, I suppose. But you know, when you're young at that age, you're naive. You've got a very limited experience with the world and what's right and wrong. You know, you don't really know. And yeah, I suppose years later I thought it was quite inappropriate, but I had no idea, you know, that he would go on to commit such offences of that nature. And it's I didn't say anything at the time, just because I suppose it would have been embarrassing, and I didn't see it as that awful either, really. You know, I consented to it. He didn't force me to do anything. And at least what happened with me was fairly mild in terms of abuse. What he's later alleged to have done with others, you know, is much more serious in its nature. In Bulgaria, where he's been living, there were a group of teenagers that were staying at his house, many of whom have now accused him of grooming and molesting them. He's now in prison in Bulgaria, awaiting trial, I understand. So we're waiting to hear the outcome of that, and we're trying to spread awareness about what's happened. His sister, his biological sister, my foster sister from that family, she then found more child pornography on his own computer, and that convinced her. She also hadn't really known. She had no idea either what was going on for many years. And I gather that she'd become quite close to him and trusted him, as did a great many others, really. All of which really leads me to question, more broadly, how somebody is capable of getting away with such abuses like that. And really, I suppose if I look at it, he worked kind of unaccountable. He was so entrusted with a level of power and authority over many of the youths that the parents had trusted him with. He seemed beyond reproach, beyond judgments, beyond any questioning, you know, because he had this double life that he lived so well. You know, he went to such extreme lengths, incredibly. You know, he was out there preaching, moralising, giving sermons, and to such a nature, you know, where he was condemning other people. In fact, I found him quite judgmental, rude, arrogant. And so I kept a safe distance from him for many years. I just didn't like a lot of the things he said, to be honest. And now when I look back, in hindsight, his whole theology was of a corrupt nature anyway. And it really actually, I can see that it's that corrupt theology that really allowed him to justify his own actions, really. And so the evidence was there in plain sight if you sort of looked through what he was saying and analysed it closely enough. You know, basically, I mean, we had a big argument online about it one day. his main thrust of his theology was that we are born corrupted. And that's his sort of most basic position. Everyone is born a sinner. Whereas I argued that we are born innocent, but into a corrupted world. That's my position. We become corrupted by the world. Things are done to us against our nature, things that we didn't consent to. We are coerced or forced sometimes at a young age into things when we don't understand what's right or wrong. We become corrupted at a young age by a corrupted and fallen world. That's my theology, my belief. His belief, however, is one in which young children, babies even, are sinners, are corrupted. Now, I found that just incredible that a pastor could believe that, and he could have so much support, whole congregations. And I think probably people didn't take the time to actually seriously question that kind of ideology and what it really means. I responded to him online and said, quite upset, how can a baby be corrupted? How can a baby be a sinner? A baby doesn't do anything right. They don't do anything wrong. A baby is not at a level where they are consciously deciding to do moral or immoral things. As we get older, we have a more increased ability to do right or wrong. Okay? That's my theology. Because your understanding of what is moral develops as you grow up. As you become older, you become more aware of what your moral responsibilities, what your duty is in life, right? And you can only be held accountable according to what your abilities and your understandings of things are. If you do something awful at a young age, for example, you don't understand the consequences of what your actions are, or you've grown up in an environment where that's all you knew and that's what you were taught to do, you can't be held as responsible as someone who's much older, who's got a wealth of different experiences in life, who knows, therefore, more or less what is right and wrong in different situations, and is much more equipped and able to make a moral discernment in a situation. Now, when I asked him online, how can you justify that belief that a young baby is a sinner, is corrupted, has got a moral dimension? He said, I asked him, give me an example of a crime, of a sin that a baby could commit. And his example, incredibly, was crying too much and attention seeking. He said that babies that cry all the time are basically selfish, and that reveals the selfish nature of mankind, and that they are just crying too much because they are attention seeking and they just want to consume their parents' time, and that they are really selfish at heart. Anyone that's really had any experience of parenting, or anyone that's not actually, but has taken the time to seriously contemplate what that means, knows that that is a kind of bankrupted morality that is really depraved. A baby cries because it wants and needs something, because it needs food or a nappy changing or a hug or reassurance, because it's got an emotional or practical need that it needs to be fulfilled. And that crying is a way of letting the parent or the caregiver know that it has that very simple need. And you might as well say that anyone that goes through some sort of trauma is a victim, is themselves a sinner or corrupt. Because isn't that what happens if you're suffering and you're neglected and you have a need that's being unfulfilled to a chronic extent, that is, right? Isn't that a natural position where you want to cry and you feel upset? And isn't that a right thing to be allowed to do that, to express your emotions and your feelings? That's not attention seeking. That's actually giving an expression to a genuine feeling that you are going through, something that's genuinely affecting you. So when I actually looked at his perverted theology years ago, I was able to discern just from that alone that he really was spreading some sort of false doctrine that was really corrupt and really, really awful, and one that actually accuses victims of being corrupt. I can understand if you dwell on something too much, if you are sort of crying all of the time when it's not actually merited, where it's not justified, where you don't have a real need or desire, or where you're play acting, and if it's crocodile tears and you're sort of doing it to manipulate other people. That certainly does happen in life, not disputing that, but where somebody has a genuine need and a genuine upset, for them to express their real emotions, that's a normal, healthy thing that everyone should be entitled to do. And where people are not allowed to do that and repress that, that certainly creates long-term issues for people. And it certainly would be for a baby, and I think many psychologists would study that and say it's deeply harmful and disturbing. If a child is crying too much, then there's obviously a sign that there's something wrong going on there, that they have some sort of need that's not being provided for, either being neglected perhaps, maybe they have some sort of illness, some sort of pain, and that's why they're crying out, because they have a need for some sort of pain relief, or something that's, whether it's a need for medicine or food, or whatever the other kind of material or emotional need might be. There's a genuine and legitimate reason for that. And there are for adults sometimes as well. Sometimes we all have a need sometimes to cry, don't we? But there's also sometimes when it's illegitimate, when it's not helpful, when it's maladaptive, where it's, over the top, where it's unnecessary. And we need to discern as adults when it is it right for us, to give an expression to our inner emotions. When is it, because it is sometimes right to repress sometimes, and other times it's right for us to acknowledge and embrace our true emotional feeling. So I kind of saw the signs of some kind of corruption within what he was doing, and his judgmentalism also was such that, he told me countless times I was going to hell, because I had some relationships with men earlier in my life. Whether people think that's right or wrong, many people make that judgment on others without necessarily knowing what their life experiences were, what I'd gone through in my life, the different situations that I'd experienced, and whether you dislike or don't homosexuality, whatever your feelings are about that, whether you see it as a sin or not, to make that moral judgment on someone else, to pass sentence as if you are a judge of their soul and you're able to sentence them and to say whether they're going to heaven or to hell, that's putting yourself in God's throne and assuming that you are all-knowing of how they've lived their life, what their intentions were, whether they were abused, what effect that might have had on them, That's assuming that you know so much about their life, what good or bad they might have done to the world, what good or bad the world might have done to them, I think we should all be cautious about judging other people. It wasn't just judgmental against me, but against many different groups of people, ironically enough. He would say Muslims, different sects of Christians he didn't believe in, people that drank too much, people that had engaged in gay and lesbian relationships. In his worldview, he was sentencing billions of us to hell, So I found that was deeply judgmental, that he really was playing God, making judgments that no man should really be making. It's okay to say to someone, I disagree with your action of what you're doing, and these are the reasons why I disagree with it. To say that in a calm, restrained manner, out of concern for someone, and to engage them in some sort of debate if they're willing to. That's understandable. If you do genuinely feel that someone's practices they're engaging within could harm them in the long term, and you feel morally compelled to say that, I can understand. You might want to and feel compelled to give them some sort of warning. If that's what you feel, and they might want to express their feelings and engage you in some sort of dialogue regarding that. And, one would hope you'd listen to their responses and respond to them. And, that's a process through which we learn from each other. Now, it's a different thing from passing a sentence on someone. I might, for example, say to someone, if you harm an innocent person, intentionally and without any good reason, that's inevitably one day going to ultimately harm your soul, and it's in your interest to refrain from doing that. All right? I might well want to say that to others if I perceive what they're doing is a genuine harm to others, and I think that they've intentionally done that, and I see no real benefit to it. I might feel morally compelled, duty-bound to try and say that to them. But that's a different thing than me passing a sentence and saying, but you're going to hell. How do I know that? How do I know the extent of all the bad things, or the good things even that they've done, or the good or bad things that the world may have done to them as well? I don't have full access completely to being all-knowing. I'm not an all-knowing deity. I'm not omniscient. And all I can do at best, is say what I feel and why I feel that, okay? But really, I suppose the whole situation, has made me sort of like look at more what were the warning signs that he was doing this corruption. And it was there. I'm not saying everybody that has a tendency to be judgmental, because we all can be. Obviously, that doesn't mean everyone's doing awful things like that. Some people have a habit of being quite moralistic and self-righteous, and being quite judgmental. And the vast majority are not doing that as a front to hide awful things, a double life. It's just that we sometimes do have a tendency to sort of think or assume we have a monopoly of our understanding on morality sometimes. Moral absolutism is a difficult thing we struggle with, and just as problematic is moral relativism, the assumption that there are no moral absolutes whatsoever, that there is no moral law or judgment necessarily. Because we are all called to make some moral judgments in our different relationships, in our interactions with other people throughout our lifetimes, throughout the many months and years and decades and lifetimes perhaps even. But I really have been provoked to thinking how he was able over such a long period to live such a double lifestyle, because it's something you read about and you see documentaries about, and it happens all too often really, where somebody is able to hide such a level of depravity and such a severe amount of corruption and abuse. And they're often hiding that behind this holier-than-thou appearance of being all virtuous. This sort of status that some people have that puts them in a position where they're beyond reproach or questioning. And I think it is that whenever anyone is in that position where they seem beyond any accountability, that's always worrying, whatever position they're in, whether it's politics, education, religion, within a family environment as well, because we all should be held accountable fairly, of course. There are unfair methods of questioning other people. There are terrible interrogation techniques, aren't there, that don't work anyway, because people then give you any information just out of fear of being hurt. But without having any kind of fair questioning and trying to discern what people's real conduct and real character is, people are given a free pass without any kind of questioning. That tends to lead, not always, but can lead to people living an unrestrained life where they're able to sort of get away with anything, really. Just giving someone anyhow too much authority. And I think that's kind of what happened, really, that he was able to get into that position where he was idolized in a way, beyond reproach, beyond any judgment of his fellow man. No man's beyond judgment of God, however. It's the nature of man to judge others by appearance, but God sees the inner secrets hidden within a man's heart, whether they be good or bad. And so, it's a really difficult situation. It's not unique, of course, sadly. Many other things of such a corrupt nature do happen in the world. And it's, as I say, reminded me to sort of be wary of people that don't want to be transparent and don't allow themselves to be questioned publicly, openly, and in a fair and constructive manner, where they can engage with the public, in a manner in which we would all expect to be held accountable. And I think that's the golden rule, isn't it? To be consistent in our questioning, to not expect others to endure a questioning process that we wouldn't also want ourselves. We should all expect ourselves to be held accountable. I don't want to be exposed for all of the wrong things I've done, the times I've got drunk and disorderly and shouted abuse at people, and the time I nearly burned down a kitchen because I was so drunk and disturbed, and the awful other things that I may have done over the years. I don't want to talk and shame myself in public, but at the same time, we have to be willing to talk about our own corruptions, our own faults, if we have any hope to remedy those things, to recognise our own faults. How else are we going to make endeavours to try and recognise our own solutions, our own need to find those solutions for ourselves, but also for each other as well? And so it's a very disturbing kind of situation, but it has to be talked about. It's something that has got implications, and it's made me much more aware, at least, that we have to be concerned about those individuals that don't welcome and don't embrace fair questioning from others. And I'm not talking about a questioning where I allow my friend or someone who's well acquainted with me to give questions that I write down for them in a very controlled and contrived way that appears to be questioning, but that doesn't really go beyond really truly scrutinising my real conduct. I'm saying allowing for people who are independent and not friends and don't have acquaintances or conflicts of interests, allowing independent questioners to ask me questions about my own moral conduct within my life, about situations where I could have done wrong, where I could have done things much better. It's hard for any of us to do, but especially hard if you have actually done something really awful, of course. Nobody wants to be exposed in that manner. People that have perhaps done awful things like that, I would urge them to repent, and whether you believe in God or not, you might believe in your soul, and to refrain from doing harm to other people, because it's really in your own best interest to do that. But, we all do some bad to other people. It's not really an us and them thing, really. We do all harm others to some extent. I learned in my life that I went through many years when I didn't really harm anyone that much, maybe small trivial things occasionally. But that's because life was going quite well at the time. I was working well, studying a lot, socialising well, going on lots of holidays. I had a good quality of life at that time, and it's easy to sort of treat others well, when you're being treated well, isn't it? But when you're under harder circumstances, under a lot of stress, under a lot of strain, where you may be lacking support, where you may be tempted to do all sorts of other things, it's under those kind of situations. And life presents a whole variety of different kinds of challenges where we will go through different kinds of trials within our lifetime, where we'll be in a variety of different positions, different temptations. Sometimes we may be very wealthy, other times very poor. Sometimes we might have lots of power, lots of followers, lots of authority. Other times we might be very fragile or be vulnerable. or be very isolated, or be anonymous and have very few people that listen or care what we think. There may be a variety of different trials and challenges that we all might face over months and years and potentially lifetimes. And that's what proves and is the real test of the character of a person. Not just how you cope with being in one position, but how you cope with being in a whole variety of different positions within different lives, and life's fascinating and beyond any of our real understanding, and we're all students and as well as teachers and all learning, and this whole subject has really sort of provoked me to sort of look at both how I allow others to question me and where I embrace that kind of transparent questioning, and where I err away from it and shy away from it sometimes as well, like we all do, and where I sort of also try and be open and honest. And I think it's an issue that we all struggle with as well, allowing ourselves to be held accountable to other people, because that is hard, because sometimes questions can be unfair and distorted and have an agenda, and that does happen. But at the same time, there can also be those that are legitimate and do have a genuine and true concern for what our moral conduct is. If we're applying for a job, we might be working with vulnerable adults, for example. The employers might be quite concerned about our previous history, our track record, and quite understandably, they might want to ask fair questions about our relations with others and our experiences, within our lifetime, and we would want to give that information and to be able to talk freely about that, and to talk about whatever corruptions and how we've coped with those and how we are able to move on from those.